Good morning, everyone. This is Luda Kopikina with GAI Insights. Welcome to Daily AI News Review, where we rate the news essential, important, and optional. You can follow along. The articles are in gaiinsights.com/articles. Today, I have our core crew, Paul, Tim, and Ankash. Let's get right into it. Ankash, please, with the first article.
So thanks, Luda. So the first one comes from Meta, and Meta recently had an event called LlamaCon, which was their first ever event related to their Llama models, and we have all the announcements that they make at LlamaCon here.
Yes. Tim, what did you think?
I think, excuse me, I think this is optional. It's a set of product announcements. Some of them are pretty interesting, but it's a set of product announcements. They've made an API that is compatible with the OpenAI API, something I think more and more people will end up doing. The market leader almost always sets the standard in these kind of places. And, nothing really earth-shattering beyond that. And even that isn't really that earth-shattering. And again, it's just a series of product announcements. They did of interesting note, because we've been talking about it for a while, but it's just interesting, not essential. They have done some integration more deeply with both NVIDIA and with Cerebras and Grok. So they're diversifying the Cerebras and Grok are hardware vendors. And they're diversifying the hardware on which they can be optimized, which is probably a good move. But yeah. I would say optional for the AI leader. Nothing unbelievably exciting here, and it's a series of product announcements.
Yeah, and they're not quite ready, even for the API. You have to fill out a form, and it's
the private data.
It's not even a product announcement yet. Paul, what did you think?
Optional for all the same reasons. I mean, we did cover yesterday them coming out with their chatbot, which was directly competitive to OpenAI. I mean, I do think it's just notable. I mean, they continue to be, at least a lot of effort with the Llama product itself, which is at least one of the leading open source products here. But for this article, optionals.
Yeah, I agree. Optional. Great. Optional it is. Let's proceed. Ankash.
Okay, the next article that we have comes from OpenAI, and it talks about Sycophancy in GPT-4o, what happened and what OpenAI is doing about it.
Yeah, pleasing chatbot. What did you think about this, Paul?
I actually had this as essential. Kind of see where the team is. I mean, this is a big enough problem that they rolled back this release. So 4.0 came out, all that chatter on in the Twitterverse and everything else, and actually rolled it back because it was too flattery. So I think this is important for the AI leader to know that the industry leader, had enough of a business rationale to roll something back, and this whole notion of these things know humans really well, and are they overly flattering, and is an aspect of these AI applications. So I had it rated as essential.
I wasn't as high as essential, but Tim, what did you think?
Yeah, I wouldn't argue with that, to tell you the truth. Anything that the interesting thing here is the reason I would say I would probably agree with essential is to remind people that these are proprietary products that are not very transparent. So, oh, well, it was a little too nice a model. It was a little too flattering. Okay, you really rolled back a release because it was just a little too flattering. I am suspicious.
Yeah.
What's that movie? We got a word for that. Suspicious.
Okay, well, on that ground, I think I will also agree. But what was fascinating how quickly it happened. So the turnaround, right, to take it
exactly.
Off,
another
lightning
suspicious clue that
suspicious.
Really, was this really just because a few users said it was too nice to them?
Well, and Tim, as you know, for someone who's done SaaS for years, usually you hot fix a problem. You don't roll back a problem here. So this is a
Exactly.
rollback. This isn't one of
Yeah.
my. This wasn't a hot fix problem.
Yeah, I agree. That's why it caught my attention. Maybe I'm just still maybe I'm too old school. I don't know. But a rollback is a significant event. And
Yes.
the explanation was not the type you would expect of a significant event. So I just don't think they're being transparent.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one. Okay, essential it is. Let's proceed, Ankash.
The next one comes from Langchain and talks about how Docent Pro built a multi-agent travel companion with LangGraph.
Yeah, this is mine. Um, Docent Pro is a startup in California that works in the travel sector. And they created agents for specific pieces of the travel puzzle. But just having gone to Italy and planned the trip, I used LLMs, and absolutely true. If you just let them do it, they will plan an itinerary, sending you 3 hours one way and then 3 hours back on the same day. So it certainly needs guardrails. So Dawson Pro is doing that. They dissected it into 4 pieces: attractions, restaurants, hotels, and activities, into specialized agents, and used deterministic information about the distances, and clustered the attractions around a particular space, right, or place. It's all very cool, but I think a lot of people are doing exactly that. There are many startups in this space, and the article is really underwhelming. It's not quite clear what they've done, and the impact is quite not even discussed. So I rated it as optional.
Yep, totally agree. It just, interesting, could have been really interesting.
Yes.
But again, I think I was listening yesterday when Ian was talking about the fact that a lot of these use cases are just not citing any real impact of significance. So it's interesting. It seems like a good idea. It's not deep technically, and again, doesn't really tell you what the impact is either on their customers or their business.
Yeah. Paul, agree?
Yes.
Yeah, and it's the space is certainly needing some really good innovation and disruption. Like going around with a online book or in some kind of audio information doesn't work. So a lot of what we had in the past does not work. So the space, the travel help, is certainly a space really open for disruption. But this article is not there. Optional. Okay, let's go next.
The next one that we have is a research paper which talks about the leaderboard illusion.
Yeah, comes from Cohere, that really is unhappy with the
I don't like the refs.
yeah, they really complimentary to to the organizers of this community, but had to put this paper together with a lot of universities to make a point. Tim, what did you think about this?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and so I think it's actually a well done paper, and I would have trouble rating it important just because I'm not sure, despite their claim, and I think it's probably true that Chatbot Arena is the #1 place right now that most AI leaders are going to Chatbot Arena. I just don't think it's on their radar. The points they make are sort of correct. They're obviously biased. And, we've been saying, at least I've been saying, and I'll keep pounding the table on it, most of these benchmarks are meaningless. Most of these rankings are meaningless. The only way you're going to find out if it's useful is to test it in the environments you want, doing the things you want it to do. And so there is difficulty in these open source worlds, especially. There's 100,000 models. Okay. They're going to be, going to be a lot of dead fish, whatever your favorite metaphor is, up on the shore, because there's just no way 100,000 models are going to get above the radar. So naturally, anybody who is in the meta business, which is a meta business, is going to pay attention to the big ones because those are the ones everybody's using and buying. And, Brian Arthur studied this 40 years ago. This is called increasing returns. This is why in information economies in particular, leaders consolidate power very quickly. And so they're kind of right, but it's also kind of irrelevant. And we're beating up an optional article again. So I'll stop there. I think it's a really great read. I almost said, in channeling my inner John, we should rank it important because people should read this article, in my opinion, when they have time, just because it's well laid out and it points out some important ideas. But it's just not that relevant to the day-to-day activities of the average leader.
All it says is just don't trust the metrics that you're seeing in these articles.
Right, but that's a good message.
That's a message
from my perspective.
What do you think? Optional, or should we mark it as important?
No, I think optional. I think optional.
Yeah, I was also.
Especially because if it was just done by the universities, it would have a little more weight. But it is pretty. If it's not sponsored by Cohere, it's heavily influenced by Cohere, and therefore it's much less unbiased.
Right. Own your own evals, says Ashish, and we certainly agree. Absolutely.
Yeah,
if you want to use a model, evaluate it for your applications for sure. Do not trust the various metrics.
Yes, what would be really useful, in fact, is Eval Arena, where you could where you would have tools that you could actually evaluate your specific use case. That would be helpful.
And certain providers like AWS tells us that they have that.
They tell us they do, right?
They tell us they do. We haven't tested it, right? Okay, great. So optional it is. Let's proceed to the next one, Ankash, please.
Okay, the next one comes from Curate AI and talks about Helium 1, their modular and multilingual LLM.
Paul, what do you think about this? Yet another LLM?
This is a product announcement. It's focused on European languages. It's a big model. Also has some models for on device, but it's a product announcement, so optional.
Tim, what were your thoughts?
Totally agree. It could end up being important in Europe again. We have to make that one kind of caveat that Europe is pretty geocentric, and more so probably given the current administration's activities. So, but this is a research.org in Europe. So it could eventually become interesting. If you're in Europe, it's obviously more important. The fact that they created this data set, I think, is quite important potentially, but to a pretty small audience. Europeans interested in accessing multiple, data sets for European languages.
Yeah, I wasn't sure whether this dactory that they talk about, the data factory, essentially creating much more focused data set and verified data set on the common crawl. I didn't think it was European based. It was generic, and that's what attracted me to this article. So I was actually between optional and important. I agree with you. It's yet another model, but what they discuss about, and they open source it and put all of their thinking in GitHub, right? So it is an interesting angle, right, for people who are creating focused LLMs to qualify their data sources and create and using this code. So it's potentially important, but what do you think from that perspective?
Yeah, I wouldn't argue with important, and you're right. I don't believe the data set itself we don't really know. You'd have to probably take a closer look at it, but you're right. It doesn't seem like the data set is particularly European oriented. They did a lot of work on languages to make them good for all the European languages. That's why I think if you're a European business, this could be quite important, because Europe has, you know, a much more challenging problem dealing with languages than America. You have, you know, although we could argue about that with dialects and everything, but still, for the most part, Americans can figure each other out pretty quickly. Whereas, you know, if you're in Europe, you have at least 10 probably important languages you have to cope with.
Yeah, the data set, it says here that it's 2 terabytes uncompressed, 770 gigs.
Right, so it's not big.
But yeah,
this is aimed at, the other thing
million.
is, the other thing to note is this is really aimed at on-device stuff. This is a small
Right.
model.
And that's maybe quite important, actually. So 400 million text documents, around 60% of them in English, and only like a little bit, 8 in Spanish, 7 in Dutch, and 7 in French. So it is mostly US.
Yep.
I don't know. I'm thinking maybe to flag the fact that they took the common crawl, that is where most of the data is, right? It's an open source, and then they created this this code to really qualify these and remove redundancies and stuff like that. So it might be actually very useful.
Luda, you got the chalk. You're feeling the chalk power. So
okay, let's rate it as important. Let's proceed. You're right, Paul.
Yeah. The last one that we have comes from AWS and talks about how Intervision is accelerating AI development using AWS's LLM League and Amazon's SageMaker AI.
Yeah, I was between optional and important on this one. Optional, it's because it's really what in Tim's language of puff piece, or an explanation of their capabilities applied to an IT company in the public sector. So the problem that they are addressing, the questions type, there's an abandoned property in my neighborhood that's becoming a safety hazard. What's the process that the city can intervene and the like, and how long does it take? What attracted me, why I was thinking might be important, is how they are putting it together. And for the enterprises, this type of engagement of the employees for customer benefit is a great way. So they essentially put it into three pieces. They gamify, so they teach folks to use the tools, and then they essentially help them put together the data, and then they stage the model, and then they have a people board and expert board to evaluate the responses. So Ankash, if you can scroll down to where like 6 or so responses are. So here we go. 5. So these are 5 models answering the same question, and the experts are evaluating how quickly, how well, and so on the responses are given. And that is an application that would eventually go on the customer bot in the public sector for for this company. So I kind of liked this approach, and that's why I was thinking important. What do you think, Tim?
Yeah, I was on the boundary too. Again, you know, LangChain, LangSmith, LangGraph should take a lesson from AWS, at least in the structure and detail, because this use case is well structured and pretty detailed. No real results again. So it's hard to say, well, okay, this is really interesting, but how much business impact has this had? Now, maybe it's too early, but I think it would be good if they at least said, well, we can't really give you results yet, but 6 months from now, a year from now, we're going to come back and do an update kind of thing. So that's the one real weakness of it to me. But I think it's actually, I had this sort of as important, you know, sort of leaning important, because this is probably something good for organizations to know about. I mean, Amazon does a good job because this is actually a smart program for them. So there's a program with Amazon that you can create a gamified development process where they will sponsor you and help you have your own employees develop new options using generative AI. and they'll help you understand how to use the tools. And these people are salespeople and marketing people. They are not developers. So that is a great ad. This is back to John's how you really do good marketing. This is great marketing from my perspective for Amazon. And I think probably useful for a lot of organizations, mid-sized organizations, especially to look at, because they could potentially take advantage of this. And there's nothing wrong with that. And these kind of mini hackathons can often be very valuable in getting new products together, especially if you can get these kind of multidisciplinary non-IT teams leading the charge, because they have a much better understanding of customer desires. So I liked it. I just don't know, I'm a little bit of show me. It's, there's not much here in terms of what the end results are for the effort put in, but I sure like the idea. And
Yeah, and
I'm
it's
going
a
to send
great,
it to the company I'm working with, Manat, and say, hey, we ought to probably think about this.
yeah, this is a great engagement for the folks who know the customer best. What did you think, Paul?
Yeah, I thought Tim's well stated. I mean, I can support important. I mean, I really want to highlight Tim's notion that we need to help leaders engage non-technical people doing, hackathons with real things out. I'd first want them to do a hackathon with a secure employee chatbot, so they can at least get competence in that, which still many companies don't have. Yeah.
But that provides you the environment. And so what we're highlighting is this is the way to get the people inside the company to really learn how to do it and create value for the customer. So it's a great engagement. But Ashish is asking us, show me the money.
Yeah.
So
Well, I think I think the whole point that Tim was making, it was a really good, I think his article in Wall Street Journal about Johnson & Johnson moving to high impact stuff rather than capability here. So this is a case study on capability, not a case study on business impact. And that's clearly where we're all headed here, because we're overloaded in use case capability and proof of concepts.
So your notion, you can support important, but you were optional originally.
Yeah, my gut is optional, but I'll support important.
Okay, yeah, that's where we both, I think, Tim and I were. Okay,
Yep.
Let's put it as optional for now. And that actually, we have, this is a great input or note from Ashish on our prior article about the data set. He's just commenting that the data set, if it's good quality, doesn't need to be very large. Yeah, you can create a very good reasoning SLM on the small data if it's good quality. Thanks, Ashish. Okay, any announcements as Ankaj is preparing the...
Just a couple things. One is we had a really good learning lab this week talking about understanding all the different models within OpenAI's ChatGPT 4o, o3. This next Monday, next learning lab, we're going to go deep onto the OpenAI's ChatGPT teams. That's a $30 a month per user, but you have a secure environment where they don't use your data. And that's I'm increasingly believing that's really the recommendation that companies need to do, even if they get it just for 90 days for the management team for a whole host of reasons here. So a deep dive on ChatGPT teams from OpenAI on Monday's Learning Lab.
Okay, well, thank you. Ankaj, we're close to having...
Well, and Sheesh is also mentioning the AI Community Conference today and tomorrow that Phil's putting on in Microsoft Nerd Center. And then last night there was all kind of great stuff. Last night in Boston here, they also had the Boston Generative AI conference, which had, I think, a couple hundred people there. I was there for a little bit, and another one on and then tomorrow we have our monthly Get Organized AI Blueprint. So lots of activity in the Boston ecosystem.
Right. So for today, we have essential, important, and the rest is optional. So Sycophancy in OpenAI 4.0 is essential. And yeah, with that, well, thank you all. Thank you, our participants, Kevin, Ashish, Vivek. Really appreciate it. And we'll see you all tomorrow.
Great. Thank you, Tim. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.